Welcome, everyone. It's really great to have you all joining this event. My name is Anisa Pinto. I'm a project manager at the Climate Group, and we're here to share with you some of the results and future opportunities from the States and Regions Remote Sensing Project, also known as the STARS project. In the next slide, please. A couple more. Those are the instructions. So this is a pilot initiative in partnership with Climate Trace. And our aim was to provide greenhouse gas emissions data for all the major emitting sectors to 6 Under2 coalition states and regions, covering the years 2015 to 2020, and also support climate action planning and measuring, reporting, and verification. Some of the objectives were also to create a proof of concept for satellite-derived emissions data, and also validate Climate Trace's states and regional model for estimating emissions. So for the past 12 months, we've been working with 6 states: Abruzzo in Italy, Basque Country in Spain, Pernambuco in Brazil, Jalisco and Querétaro in Mexico, and Western Cape in South Africa. We have requested all their available emissions data, locations of industries, and as much information as they could provide. This data was necessary to train the AI models so Climate Trace could get the most accurate emission estimates for their regions. It was a collaborative effort, and Climate Trace will present a bit more about the methodology later in the session. So in the next slide, we can see our agenda for today. We'll kick off with a message from former Vice President of the United States, Al Gore. Then we'll hear about the importance of state-level action from the Climate Group. Climate Trace will tell us about the coalition and some insights from the STARS project. We'll also hear from 2 of our participant states, Western Cape and Jalisco. And finally, we'll give you a chance to ask any questions that you might have to our speakers. Then finally, we'll wrap up with a message from one of our funders at ClimateWorks Foundation. It is a packed agenda, so let's begin with an opening message from Al Gore, former Vice President of the United States and founding member of the Climate Trace Coalition. The next slide, please.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you virtually today. And to begin with, please allow me to offer my sincere thanks to the team at the Climate Group, to the state and regional governments who participated in the STARS program, and of course, to our incredible team at Climate Trace for your amazing work over the past year to deliver actionable emissions data that's going to enable meaningful climate action. For far too long, efforts to solve the climate crisis have been really hindered by a lack of data to inform intelligent decision making. We've known for decades that the concentration of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere has been growing very rapidly, but we've been unable to pinpoint exactly where those emissions are all coming from and in what amounts, at what rate, and whether they're going up or down. Yes, of course, we know that coal-fired power plants, heavy manufacturing, transportation, lots of other sources are all major contributors of these emissions, but which power plants, which steel plants, how much from each, and where? Where are emissions from cars and trucks going up, and where are they going down? Government policymakers, as well as leaders and decision makers in civil society, corporate sustainability, investing, and innovation, all need accurate, reliable, and actionable information to inform their emissions reduction strategies. After all, as the old cliche goes, you can only manage what you can measure. In this most critical decade of action, we need radical transparency to enable rapid reductions in emissions. If we want to cut emissions by 50% in the next 7 years, as the scientific community has explained we must, well, then we need state and regional governments leading the way, obviously. And as you'll hear from the officials who participated in the STARS program, state and local governments have often been forced to rely on generalizations and awkward methods of downscaling official national estimates, processes that often obscure variations across jurisdictional boundaries and geographies. And frequently, national inventories themselves are many years out of date, and often they're unfortunately filled with big gaps and missing chunks of data. At Climate Trace, we and our partners in the STARS project are proud to be working hard to change that. And we're proud to be collaborating with these regional leaders to learn from them and to ensure that they have the information they need to help solve the climate crisis. So again, allow me to thank everybody who's been supporting the STARS program, and in particular, let me thank the officials from the states and regions in Italy, Brazil, Spain, South Africa, and Mexico for working with our teams and for the dedication that you are already demonstrating. We need your leadership now, and we need it more than ever. Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Great. Some inspiring words to start the session. Thanks to Al Gore for sending us this message. And now, as you can see, we'd like to share a little bit more about the Climate Group's role, the importance of states and regions for climate action, and our ambitions. So I'd like to welcome Debbie Rahman, Head of Transparency and Pathways at the Climate Group. Thank you, Debbie.
Thanks so much, Anisa, and yeah, welcome to everyone. It's really fantastic to see that video and to hear from former Vice President Al Gore, and for him to highlight the important leadership role we're seeing across states and regions. And before I begin, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Gore and his team, our partners at Climate Trace, Google.org, and ClimateWorks Foundation for making this pilot possible. And of course, all of our participating member states, and we're really looking forward to hearing from some of you later in the event. So in the climate space, there's a tendency to place a lot of focus on national sort of level climate pledges, but states and regions are vital players on the path to net zero emissions. They have real power to drive positive climate impact. And partnering with Climate Trace on the STARS project has really proven this for us. States and regions are at the heart of climate action. They're close to people, they connect local and national levels, they have strategic competencies and offer unique regional knowledge. According to UNDP, 50 to 80% of mitigation and adaptation actions necessary to tackle climate change are or will be implemented at the subnational or local level of government. As the Secretariat of the Under 2 Coalition, we're harnessing that power and opportunity. We're the largest global network of states, regions, and provinces and other subnational governments committed to achieving net zero by 2050 at the latest, and we want to achieve that fast. Connecting our members with Climate Trace has given them the tools to take control of their emissions. And we've been working closely with states and regions for a number of years now, working with them on their bottom-up inventories as well. And often what we find is that states and regions lack the resources, time, or even technical expertise to deliver the actions that they need to reduce emissions. So our STARS pilot has really helped to bridge that gap. What Climate Trace offer is an exciting and innovative approach to tracking emissions, and we'll hear more about it later. We've been using this to provide governments with a new way to track their emissions in a highly granular and timely manner, which has not been previously available for most sectors and subnational governments. So I think the unique point for us is the fact that this technology and methodology is being used at the local level, and we can't emphasize enough how valuable that is. States and regions need support, but they need it to be tailored to their individual needs. And that's another thing we've been doing on the coalition. We've been really sort of tailoring the capacity building support we've been providing states. So we find that a one-size-fits-all approach to tackling emissions is not going to solve the climate crisis. And what the Climate Trace method sort of allows us is that kind of flexibility and the complementarity. You know, we're still working in parallel with existing inventory data and can provide granular and timely results. And that's what states and regions need. So as a former vice president sort of said, we can only sort of manage emissions if we can measure them. And the more accurately we can do this, the stronger our chances of success are in introducing policies that actually work. So I think for us at the Climate Group and the Under 2 Coalition Secretariat, what we're really keen to do now is scale this work and connect more states and regions with Climate Trace. We've worked with 6 states in this pilot phase, and we'll hear more from them in a little while. We really want to kind of scale that up. So we'll hear a bit more from Climate Trace about how we can do that. And for us, driving a just and equitable transition to net zero relies on all states and regions, particularly those in the Global South that we've been working closely with. having the tools and knowledge that they need to tackle emissions. And we're going to make this happen. And we'd love to work with you on this. So please do get in touch, find out more about our work, ask us any questions you like. We have a Q&A in this event as well. Let us know how you'd like to get involved. We're always keen to hear from new members and supporters. So yeah, please do reach out to us. Thank you so much. And back to Anaïsa.
Thank you so much, Debbie, for your words and for kind of putting all our work into perspective, what we're trying to achieve with states and regions and kind of the power they have to drive this climate action. So now, as Debbie alluded to, it's time to hear from Climate Trace and some insights on the STARS project. So I'd like to welcome Gavin McCormick, co-founder and executive director at Climate Trace. Welcome, Gavin.
Thank you, Nisa, and thanks everyone for coming today. We're really excited that you're here. So my role in this presentation is to explain a little bit about how the Climate Trace Coalition came to be and how the data work. So TJ, could you do the next slide, please? So the problem we were trying to solve is the fact that many different organizations have individual pieces of the puzzle on high quality emissions data, but no one organization has all of it together. So I'll explain in a second how we came across the idea that technologically we could move faster together. But in terms of what we were trying to accomplish, the big three things we think are difficult about the current state of emissions data today. The first is that so much of it is independent, so much of it is not independent. And so we think that independent data is important because it can often be the case that what we know about greenhouse gas emissions actually comes from asking the polluters themselves how much they have polluted. So you can imagine the obvious risk in this strategy. We think in most cases, companies are reporting quite honestly, but it is extremely easy in the modern era for a major power plant, a major oil refinery, a major cement plant to essentially falsify its data, and no one would know because there's no independent objective way to check. So we wanted to have an objective, independent way of looking and just making sure that everyone is honestly reporting. The other thing we wanted to address is the fact that it's very expensive to gather emissions data, and so often data are really out of date. At the country level, it was the case even a year ago that a majority of countries worldwide hadn't had a national emissions inventory since the Paris Agreement. So you can imagine the problem. If policy is attempting to bring emissions down, but we have to wait many years after passing policy to figure out whether anything actually worked. To Jeffy's point, we're not getting information about whether our policies are succeeding, and we are not able to make the most effective policies. The other issue we've really seen is that a lot of emissions information is not comprehensive. It's often the case that it is difficult to gather emissions information. So people will gather whatever is relatively easy to gather, and there will be big gaps in hard to monitor sectors. This also can increase the incentive problem that if a polluter makes it difficult to monitor emissions in their sector, it is more likely that nothing will be done. And so we wanted to come together as a coalition and say, how could we provide objective, third-party, comprehensive global emission that is up to date? DJ, could you do the next slide? Thank you. And we hit upon the idea that one of the primary data sets that is available worldwide is satellite imagery. So the guts of this project is many different organizations with expertise in different types of emissions or different pieces of the technology to all share our resources together in something that works much like Wikipedia, but is a little bit more structured and has more independent checks to combine all of this information in the following system. First of all, we use all the satellite imagery that is publicly available. So we're gathering satellites from the government of the United States, the European Union, China, private companies. We're pulling that all together into a database that is able to look from space at major sources of emissions: power plants, oil and gas fields, rice fields, which emit a lot of methane, cement, refineries, airports, and so on. Then what we do is we gather information about where we do have third-party data and even sensors on the ground about, at the time these photos were taken, exactly how much emissions were coming out of that facility. And then we use artificial intelligence and machine learning to train algorithms to see, okay, if we know that in these photos, the facility looked like this and the emissions level was this, we can have that algorithm learn, what do emissions look like? What does a certain pattern of emitting activity look like? Then, because we have satellite imagery of the whole world several times a day, we can look at different facilities that are the same category, but have different imagery. And we can estimate what the emissions are at that time of every facility. This project will be far too big for one organization. But what we've learned is with about 10 core founding members and about 100 contributors and collaborators, Climate Trace as a coalition is getting very close to being able to provide pretty high quality estimates for essentially everything on the planet and putting that in an open, free, shared database. Could you next slide, please? So we have a number of use cases for this data, and we're discovering more uses every day. But the big four we focused on. The first one is comparing with existing inventories, because one of our goals was just to have an independent double check. Very fortunately, we have found that the vast majority of inventories worldwide are pretty high quality where they have data, but a lot of them have some missing data. And so filling gaps in that information and bringing it up to date, as I was saying before, that's one of our big use cases. Our second use case is providing inventories for subnational and city governments. Now, the ones we are going to discuss today already had inventories, but they were not as detailed as is possible technologically, and they had some older information. But actually, the majority of subnational governments and city governments worldwide have no emissions inventory. And so ultimately, the goal of this project is to move to the point where for the many, many organizations worldwide who have great ability to reduce emissions but are starting with nothing, we can actually provide a complete emissions inventory in time to anyone in the world who would like one. A third case in the corporate sector is helping companies buy from facilities that have a lower carbon footprint. So for example, if you buy a ton of steel, depending on which steel mill you buy it from worldwide, you can have 10 times more greenhouse gas emissions from the creation of 1 ton of steel if you get it from one facility and from another. And so starting to help companies understand where are the leaders on climate who have done the best job of driving down their carbon footprints per ton of steel, per ton of cement, per mile traveled on a ship. We're making it possible to have not just a race to the bottom for the cheapest way to produce things, but also a race to the top. What are the facilities that have figured out how to produce affordable products, but also doing it in a low carbon footprint way? And then the last thing we're doing is we're identifying new emissions reduction opportunities. So we're working with climate scientists, we're looking with city governments, we're working with corporations to find all of the opportunities for reducing emissions by improving the operation of facilities or a policy. Could you next slide, please? And so in this project, we really wanted to focus on what we think is possibly the highest impact group of stakeholders in the world, which is subnational governments who want to make climate progress. And so there is no group we have found who is better connected to those than the climate group as the secretary of the Under 2 Coalition. And so we asked Climate Group to identify some candidate states who would be really good to be a part of this first year of practicing working together, where we as Climate Trace are learning a lot from states, and the states are learning a lot from our data. The idea here is that we're beginning with states that know a lot about emissions, but they might not have completely up-to-date inventories. For example, 4 of them didn't have inventories after 2017. And so in this project, what we are doing is sharing the information that Climate Trace can see from space, having states share with Climate Trace the information they have about individual facilities, and basically balancing and calibrating the algorithms so that we can then move forward to providing high quality emissions inventories for any state worldwide that wants one. Could you next slide, please? And so I wanted to give you one example of how it is not the same to look at just the emissions of an individual state or an entire country that's in. So to take our STARS partner Abruzzo, for example, Abruzzo is a major cement manufacturing area. And so if you were to take the emissions inventory of Italy and divide it by the population of Abruzzo, you would completely miss that it's the case that Abruzzo needs to have very thoughtful inventories and policies about emissions from cement in a way that is much less relevant in other parts of Italy. And there are other patterns too. For example, in the yellow, you can see that emissions from electricity generation are actually declining in Italy as a whole, but Abruzzo has struggled a little bit more with that. So that's, for example, an interesting policy area where you can see that maybe there are more opportunities to learn from their partner states in Italy what policies have worked in electricity. By contrast, in road transportation, you can see that Abruzzo is having a lower carbon footprint than the rest of Italy, and that's an area where they might have more to share. Now, obviously, just because you know that there are emissions doesn't necessarily mean that there is an opportunity. Sometimes there is no low-cost way to improve something. But by having data like this and having good information about what is going on everywhere, we make it easier to identify the opportunities that are both good economics, good policy, and good climate progress. Could you do the next slide, please? Some other examples of insights in Pernambuco, we were able to look not just at the emissions from forestry in the state as a whole, but really at a very micro level, where are they and where have the carbon stocks been changing? So you can see in the Northwest, there's been a really significant decrease in the carbon stock, i.e. deforestation, in a way that is not really an issue in the southwestern part of the state. And so this kind of change over time and hypergranular data, we are hopeful is going to be increasingly helpful in having more and more targeted policies. Could you next slide? Another example here that was very interesting in Basque Country in Spain, we were able to look at individual road networks from space and start to measure emissions from cars at a very micro level. And the system that Basque Country had been using before was to estimate total emissions from cars by looking at how much gasoline was sold statewide. And the reason that that actually turned out to be very useful is that what our data suggest is happening is that fuel sales in Basque Country are actually much higher than you would think based on the emissions of what is actually happening in terms of cars driving in the region, because people were coming from out of the region to buy gasoline. So it appears that people have been, in some cases, for example, crossing the border from France to buy what I guess is cheaper gasoline in order to measure how you would reduce those emissions, though. You would not want to confuse a policy effect that is really people out of state taking advantage of the state's economy versus something that's happening locally. You would have different policies to solve that problem. This is one of several regions that we found a similar pattern in transportation in particular, that the inventory suggested one thing was going on, and those emissions were real, but they were actually not occurring based on the activities of people in the state, which means the policy levers to affect them might be different than was previously thought. Could you do the next slide? And so these are the insights that we think you can measure with a global system. And so where Climate Trace is today is we have gotten to 80,000 of the largest individual sources of emissions on the world. And so whether it's ships, airports, planes, anyone can go to the Climate Trace website and get a sense of this estimate. Our hope over the next year is to really increase the amount of this and go to 7 million of the largest emitting sources worldwide. So it's a little bit of a prototype right now, which is one reason we are so excited to compare our results with the states in this project. But we are getting very close to a world where any state worldwide would be able to get a reasonably comprehensive inventory from the technology. And as we go, the system is becoming just more and more reliable. Could you do the next slide? And so where we are in the story technologically of Climate Trace is we first wanted to start with country level estimates because we've been asked by some folks at the United Nations to really help with national emissions monitoring. But where we think things got really interesting is this November when we were able to first release detailed, we call them asset level, but an individual ship, an individual refinery, an individual farm, asset level emissions inventory of those largest 80,000 sources, 500 per sector. Our goal this year is to get to nearly complete global coverage, around about 7 million emitting units. And then in future, in constantly increasing the quality, one of the things we want to move from is from annual reporting to actually monthly or even weekly reporting. So that's kind of the roadmap that we're marching down, and artificial intelligence just continues to get better as you continue to work on it and feed it more data in these kind of dialogues back and forth with states, making sure that we're having accurate information and learning from them in addition to sharing what we know along the way. Could you next slide? And so what we see as the next opportunity in this project is 4 things. The first and probably the most important is scaling to more regions. So we were so excited to start with 6 of the highest caliber states out there who've really been thinking very thoughtfully about GHG inventories. But we would like to get to a place where every member of the Under 2 Coalition and ultimately potentially every subnational government worldwide has the ability to get access to high quality information for their specific region. The technology is getting really ready. The issue, of course, is that it takes a lot of capacity building and conversation sometimes for people to get used to this new artificial intelligence approach. So a lot of work has to go into it in addition to creating the data to make sure that it's really getting used. So one of the things we want to do is to continue to provide actionable data, because it's one thing to have one inventory. It's a very different thing to get folks really used to a system that will always be there when they need it and that updates every year and eventually every month. We think that'll really be a game changer for policy measurement. Of course, we're improving the system over time. So as we add more and more satellite and ground truth data, and as the AI has more and more time to iterate, we are just going to increase accuracy and granularity over time. And the last thing we're doing, I think, is something not very obvious about this project. One of the things that we think we can do as a big coalition of groups sharing emissions data is not just provide one estimate, but compare them with all the different estimates, and finally move past the problem that there's one set of emissions data for countries, a completely different set for provinces, a completely different set for cities, corporations, and carbon markets. And surprisingly, they often don't agree with each other. So we are getting to the place where we can actually make sure that we have filled in all the gaps and have all of the companies in a country have their emissions add up to that country's estimate of emissions, and have all the cities and regions in a country have their emissions number add up to the country, so that we no longer have a problem of missing emissions data, which has been such an issue in the climate fight until now. So we're really excited about these projects. We've been thrilled on this project, and we are really looking forward to hopefully being able to continue with Climate Group and the states, both in the existing project and others who are interested in joining. And if anybody would like to join us, we would love to talk with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Gavin, for the presentation, for explaining this process so eloquently, the importance of this work, but also the potential to improve and to expand. And I see we've got questions coming through. That's great. Keep them coming. We've got a Q&A session shortly where we'll try to answer them. And we are going to now have the opportunity to talk to some of the participant states from the project. So they might actually be able to answer some of those questions through sharing their experience. So now I'd like to welcome Lisa Jennings-Boom from the Government of Western Cape in South Africa and Arturo Calero from the Government of Jalisco in Mexico. Welcome both. It's really great to have you join and be able to hear your experiences. So I'd like to start with Lisa, and let's try to make it a bit of a conversation. But Lisa, what were the motivations for Western Cape for wanting to join this project? What was the need?
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I think from the Western Cape side, we've got a long history of climate change action. As the Western Cape, we've been working in the climate change space since, oh, sorry, something is playing in the background. So the Western Cape has got a long history of working in the climate change space. We've been working here in climate change since 2005, and we've really been trying to get to grips with the emissions picture for the Western Cape. So up until now, we've had a pretty good idea of kind of the energy related picture, but in the last 2 years we've started working on a full greenhouse gas inventory for the first time. This also lines up with our work on doing a 2050 emissions pathways for the Western Cape as part of our net zero by 2050 commitments that we've that our Premier signed up to. So we were really excited to work on this project, partly because we realized that there are gaps in our data. Data is a bit of a challenge in the South African context. A lot of it is collected at a national level. A lot of it is, there are moratoriums or delays placed on it in terms of when it can be released. So we're looking at 18 months to 2-year delay on some sources of data. And also a lot of the data is collected nationally. So it's giving a national picture, and it's very difficult to kind of get that at a provincial level. So we were really excited by this project to see how we could get additional information to supplement what we have already, and to build on where we have gaps, and take this work forward in order to kind of direct the action that we're taking as the Western Cape.
Thank you so much. And I'm curious, Arturo. You know, Mexico on the other side of the world, slightly on the side. What were the motivations for you and for the government of Jalisco?
Sí, muy buenos días o tardes a todas y a todos. Pues Jalisco es un estado, como lo mencionas, en México, que ha participado ya en varios proyectos con la intención de mejorar estas métricas de mitigación. Justo cuando el proyecto STARS lo conocimos a través de The Climate Group, estábamos terminando el proyecto de huella climática, que fue muy importante para nosotros en la construcción del inventario que tenemos más actualizado, que se publicó en el 2020. Cuando nos comentaron de este proyecto también nos atrajo en primer momento esta parte de participar para mejorar y ampliar la obtención de datos. Tradicionalmente los inventarios que se han hecho en Jalisco, que han sido 3, han sido a partir de la metodología internacional de IPCC, que es la que mandata México como país y en la cual, digamos, pues hay ciertas formas tradicionales de obtención de datos que digamos era para nosotros fue para nosotros este proyecto muy importante para poder compararlos, ¿no? También nos permitía como oficina, una oficina que tiene muchas capacidades, muchos de los que formamos parte acá somos personas jóvenes, entonces queríamos conocer cómo poder trabajar con otras áreas que normalmente nada más nos proveen datos para ciertos sectores, como es el caso, por ejemplo, del área de geomática, y trabajar juntas en este mismo proyecto para poder justo conocer las necesidades tanto de contar con datos importantes, pero a la vez con la generación de otra información que históricamente no se había dado, ¿no? Entonces, pues Jalisco, digamos que hemos formado parte de varios pilotajes, no es el primero, nos gusta mucho justo conocer otras formas y otros modelos, incluso otras técnicas como se pueden hacer. Y esto también fue una de las grandes motivaciones que nos permitieron, digamos, ingresar, además de compartir, obviamente, las experiencias locales que como un gobierno subnacional en México tenemos con otros gobiernos subnacionales a nivel mundial. Eso es un poco el gran panorama de la motivación, ¿no, Anaísa? Que puedo comentarles a ti y al auditorio.
Thank you, Arturo. Very much a kind of exploratory effort, learning and finding other methodologies. I saw, Lisa, you got rid of your little companion there in the room. Wonderful. Well, and now I'm curious, we had one question coming through actually asking, you know, is the data from the results different than the original inventories? And we all know that, yes, it is. In many occasions it is. So I guess it'd be interesting perhaps to share it with the audience, you know, how has this project been helpful? How are you going to use this data? And, you know, what did you learn from the differences, or, you know, where wasn't it helpful? Perhaps going to Lisa first as well.
Thank you. Yes, no, that was my puppy who decided to come visit. She's still here though. So for us, yes, the data was different in most sectors, but I think a lot of that is due to different methodologies used and different ways of collecting. One of the things that is a challenge for us is South Africa, where the Western Cape is based, has got a centralized electricity system, and most of the electricity generation, especially the coal-based power stations, are not within the boundaries of the Western Cape. So if you look at a satellite picture of the Western Cape, there'll be very little around electricity or energy generation or power. So that does give a slightly skewed picture, because energy is the biggest contributor to emissions in the Western Cape. We're sitting at about 88% of all our emissions are from the energy sector. But it was very useful for us to see what information the STARS project could get us around electricity generation and the power sector, what is happening in the Western Cape. And we're really going to use that to feed into our work around the just energy transition and the shifts that need to be made in the sectors to kind of get to net zero. Another sector that was really valuable for us was the industrial sector, so the industrial process and product use type emissions, where a lot of that data isn't collected for all facilities in even at a national level. There are thresholds that companies need to go over in terms of emission that require reporting. So we actually only have data for about 4 or 5 facilities in the Western Cape. So that was a really nice way for us to get some additional data for that specific industrial sector, so that we can identify what opportunities there are for that sector and how we can take that work forward. Transport is also another sector that we're quite interested in, and seeing ours again is similar to the example given earlier. We base it on fuel sales, similar picture, certain areas. There's a lot of freight transport, so they're filling up in one of our districts and then moving out of the province. So it was looking at how can we improve the quality of the transport related data. So I think for us, this has been a really great starting point, but we've got a lot of questions and want to get some more information and see how we can improve this over time for our situation as well. Thanks.
Absolutely, thanks. Definitely, there's still conversations going on, and of course, the data will continue to improve. But it's great to hear that we're able to fill some gaps. And I'd like to hear now from Arturo. Is this the case for Jalisco as well? Has this data been helpful in some way?
Sí, claro. Creo que como lo comenta Lisa, en el caso de Jalisco es un tema muy similar. Evidentemente, y como lo comentó también Gaby en su momento, esta nueva metodología nos permite también conocer emisiones en tiempo real que evidentemente no tenemos en el radar, y digamos, dado que se levanta el inventario a través de metodología IPCC, nosotros recabamos esa información anual, pero no es lo que está sucediendo día a día, y quizá esto es un tema interesante en Jalisco, dado que justo cuando se hizo el inventario, nosotros estábamos apenas en la construcción de una termoeléctrica, una planta generadora de energía, y digamos, se estimaron las emisiones a partir de los datos del proyecto, pero no se pudieron incluir, dado que no estaba en funcionamiento esta planta, y en funcionamiento cuando nosotros estábamos presentando el inventario. Entonces, estas métricas que logramos ahora obtener a través del proyecto de STARS, lograron, digamos, identificar estas emisiones en tiempo casi real, pues, o digamos, muy inmediato, que se tendrán que comparar en su momento con los inventarios tradicionales que se levantan para que en ese momento, digamos, nosotros podamos dar una mayor comprensión sobre estas emisiones. También se obtuvieron datos, en nuestro caso, para transporte, tanto en carretera como en aviación, para algunos usos de fertilizantes sintéticos, sobre todo para temas de cambio de uso de suelo, el cual ahora, y hablaré un poco más adelante, ha representado un reto por las metodologías que se trabajan a nivel local, ¿no? Evidentemente también temas de detección y facilidades con el sistema de ganadería fueron datos que se obtuvieron, y temas de disposición final de residuos. Creo que hay una lista evidentemente un poco grande, y para la audiencia sería bastante interesante conocer los resultados uno a uno. Sin embargo, creo que no hay tiempo en este momento para mencionarlos.
Thank you very much, Arturo. Yeah, I think definitely we've noticed a lot of benefits from this data, and of course, as Gavin was explaining, we're looking at major emitting sectors and kind of assets. So some of this data will not be captured by satellites, and we should not be afraid of these differences. A lot of times, you're just really focusing on those big emitters, those big industries that we really need to target and direct our climate action towards, and not necessarily focus on the smaller ones. But it's really great to hear that both Western Cape and Jalisco have been benefiting from this project. Is there one key learning, this one thing you have learned from this project that you'd like to share with the audience, just kind of quickly? Lisa.
I think I'll go first. I think that there was a lot of excitement in our team about this project. We've got one of my colleagues is constantly looking at satellites and seeing how we can utilize this data. So when this project started, he was extremely excited. And I think it's for all of us. we're a team a very small team. We have very little budgets to appoint consultants. So for us, it's about ourselves doing the work. So this was another fantastic learning opportunity for us to see what else is out there, how we can utilize other sources of data and build on what we have and what we've been working on. So I think for us, the biggest thing was just another learning experience and seeing what else is out there and excited about what this could do for us in the future.
Thank you, Lisa. It's wonderful to hear that, and definitely a learning experience for us as well. Arturo.
Sí, coincido igual con Liz, también somos equipo pequeño y nosotros no es que no tenemos presupuesto en realidad. Justo lo que nos ha dado es, y lo comentaba anteriormente, es ver cómo se obtienen los datos de otra manera y poder comparar con lo que tradicionalmente, digamos, obtenemos los datos con las metodologías estandarizadas que ya tenemos. Eso es como una de las cosas importantes. Creo que también nos quedan muchos pendientes, sobre todo porque estas metodologías nos apoyan a poder llegar a estimaciones un poco más personalizadas, como lo comentaba también Gavin en su exposición. El contar con información muy localizada y muy particular nos ayuda a llegar un poco más hacia las cuestiones locales necesarias para poder, digamos, no estar en comparación o contar con información que se genera a nivel país. Pues México es un país mucho más grande que Italia, por ejemplo, y bajo ese contexto también tenemos una diversidad muy amplia y digamos, ello nos permite, con esta metodología nos permite llegar a ello. También encontramos algunos retos, sobre todo con estas metodologías y algunos de los sectores que nos importan en Jalisco, como es el tema de la ganadería, es nuestro segundo emisor después del transporte. Sin embargo, esta ganadería se da de manera extensiva en nuestras selvas y bosques. Entonces es complicado a partir de la metodología y digamos la forma en como hasta el momento Climate Trace tiene desarrollada ello, poder estimar emisiones de este tema, ya que se requerían que estuvieran de manera intensiva, digamos, todo el ganado conjunto, ¿no? Y en Jalisco sucede básicamente en nuestros ecosistemas. Entonces, ahí hay un gran reto de ver cómo podemos mejorar mutuamente, ¿no? Desde la obtención de datos locales con la compañía, en este caso, de Government. Creo que también es una gran oportunidad y ha sido un gran reto poder involucrar a estos equipos técnicos, ¿no? En diferentes áreas que utilizamos, y como Lizzie lo decía, pues distintos lenguajes. Son lenguajes que de pronto tenemos que nuevamente aprender y nuevamente, digamos, como que estar muy atentos digamos, a estas diferencias y a estas formas de trabajo que creo que también se logró y logré identificar, digamos, de manera en general.
Thank you so much, Arturo. I love what you mentioned, that if only all the emissions were joined together in a small space, it'd be really easy to measure them all. Wonderful. Thank you both. I'll invite you to stay with your cameras on, and I'll call Gavin back to join us so we answer some of the questions that are coming through in the Q&A. We've got a lot of things coming. Let's try to cover some of them. I've picked a few. And one of them is, do you currently see a lot of variations between yours and other data sets or data sources? If yes, what do you think could be the reasons for these variations? We've heard a little bit of this from the States already, and now Gavin, I'd like to hear your perspective, more expert, or perhaps from developing this data.
Well, I don't know about more expert. I thought those were very, very good points. So, I like both the examples that I noticed there very much. The power plants, I think, is a really interesting example because fundamentally what we can see from space is where things happen in the physical world. And sometimes you cause emissions that don't happen within your border. And there are very interesting questions around how should you handle that. So I think we have the big limitation that we can only see things from space. Another limitation we have that you mentioned, Arturo, I really agree with, is if things are very spread out, And I think agriculture is a great example of this. We are better at detecting emissions from big sources. And when there's many small ones, that cannot match. So I think that's an example of where, for example, what we would as Climate Trace see from space would probably be less accurate than a data set that was based on, we did an inventory by counting cattle very slowly and painfully. And so we see those kinds of differences. We've also seen the other kind of differences. So we've seen a lot of examples of where companies clearly were not being completely accurate about their emissions monitoring. And the biggest thing that we've really seen is emissions everybody forgot about. So one of my favorite examples is waste sites. I don't think it came up as much in this project, but there are so many landfills worldwide that were not in anybody's emissions inventory because who is paying attention to trash? And so we think we've actually figured out that it's a much bigger share of climate change than we thought. And so I think one of the things I really get excited about this project is when you see those differences, you have to be a little bit thoughtful to figure out which answer is better. It's not automatically the same person is always right. You really need to kind of figure out how to combine them. And so one thing we're really looking forward to is building a data set that's the best of all of these insights.
Thank you so much, Gavin. Hopefully, I don't know if Lisa, Arturo, you want to add anything else?
Yeah, our team actually did an exercise where we compared our data from our GHG inventory to the data that we got from the STARS project. Some of the challenges were just the sectors and the category breakdowns in the STARS project. Do they align with ours? And some of them don't align and we're kind of not sure. So there would be some differences there. Also just the year when the data came from. I know for transport, our data was from 2018 and the STARS data was from 2021, which also was for South Africa still COVID and lockdowns. So that could have also affected the road transport figures. And we actually have collected waste data. We've done 2 exercises in the Western Cape. It is a very small percentage. It's about 5% of our total emissions, but there are a lot of landfill sites. It is spread out. We don't know the full picture, and that's something that we do want to work on. But yeah, so I think in most cases there was a fair amount of variation, but I think the reasons for those variations are understood and it's clear why there is a variation. Travel was actually quite close. So aviation was quite close. So we were like, oh, that's quite nice. And we're not sure if it's just happened like that or if it's actually all the data is quite good. So we want to look at that in a little bit more detail.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. It's really interesting to hear this context and the real life examples of how this is being translated. Arturo.
Sí, bueno, yo creo que Lizzy también lo comenta, es para nosotros un gran reto, digamos, nos han dejado con mucha más tarea, evidentemente porque justo como lo comentaba, tenemos datos, y Lizzy también lo comenta, tenemos datos anteriores y ahora datos nuevos y necesitamos hacer esa vinculación, ese match para lograr, digamos, como identificar realmente áreas de oportunidad, incluso para poder dar una buena retroalimentación a Climate Trace sobre este tema. Y bueno, yo creo que eso también nos entusiasma mucho como equipo en Jalisco y agradecemos evidentemente a todo el equipo de Climate Trace que está detrás y que nunca a veces vimos sus caras y que de pronto conocíamos solamente a través del trabajo y del resultado, y evidentemente del equipo de trabajo de Climate Group, tanto aquí en México como digamos a nivel internacional, por el trabajo de acompañamiento hacia nosotros. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Arturo. Great, we've got another comment here, flash question. This is a lot of potential for gap filling, accountability and accuracy by countries and regions, providing a verification check and support capacity limitations, as Lisa and Arturo just told us about. However, if states and regions or other entities come to rely on this data rather than developing their own greenhouse gas inventories in-house, how can they be sure that the data will always be available? What if the funding ends? What if climate choice is not here someday? There are some of the risks of relying on third parties for monitoring. And also, you know, there's Developing data and reporting systems in-house has multiple benefits for stakeholder engagement, climate governance, that governments are now trying to build, which might be more challenging if companies then feel that they're being monitored without their engagement. It's quite a long comment. I was going to call Jevi to come answer this, but she's popped in. She's ready for it. Do you want to share any comments, and then I'll go to the rest of the speakers?
Thanks, Anissa. Yeah, there's a lot in that question. I'm not sure I'll get to answer all of it, but I'll let Trace answer the one about funding. But I think we've been sort of promised that we this data will be made available, which is fantastic. But yeah, no, I think and hi to our colleagues who we worked on this previous project, the Climate Footprint Project. And we've been doing that for the past 4 years, working on bottom-up inventories. And I think we learned a lot of lessons there about, it really was about bringing together these teams. And I think, Lisa, you've done well to describe your team, and I think it's quite typical of some of the governments we're working with, like small sort of teams, don't have a lot of resources. So how do we bring that team together and empower them? And I think we wanted to sort of build on that in this project as well. And we used similar methodologies, bringing together the team. It was about capacity building. How do you learn to use this data? I think again, Lisa kind of touched on this really well, that one of her colleagues was very excited. It's an alternative. And I think, just to be clear, it will never replace that bottom-up inventory. I think we can hear from our speakers where they bring in that local knowledge to kind of say, well, this is outside of our boundary, and hold on, we can explain this. So that there's still going to be that element of comparing and contrasting the two. And I think this is what this project has done really nicely. It's not sort of saying, okay, no more bottom-up inventories, it's just going to be satellite data from now on. It's about the complementarity, and it's about filling those gaps. It's about hopefully speeding up the process. It's about alternative sources of information. So yeah, there's a lot there. And yeah, I'll let the other speakers sort of answer the rest of that question, but definitely not replacing bottom-up inventories, but seeing how we can use both. And definitely kind of building, I think one of the key things for us over the last 4 years is building these kind of governance structures. So starting with the team, but then how they engage with other secretariats, other ministries, and then, yeah, connecting up to the national level as well, looking at the kind of multi-level governance of it all. So all of that's really important. And how do we continue to build that as we scale out the project is really important to us.
Thank you, Jevi. Gavin, do you want to give any comments on this? What's the future of climate trace?
Yeah. So first, I completely agree. We're not trying to replace inventories, and I think I keep coming back to this comments you'd made, Liz, about how to reconcile. If you have 2021 data, someone else has 2018 data, what do you do? And so I think right now the state of the art worldwide in most emissions situations is it's very hard to know who's right, because that's usually the problem. Most industries have different numbers or different details of how they count things. So what we are hoping to do is to provide a comprehensive view that's almost like a key, so that you can match across different data sets and figure out who can agree with who. And we hope that even, goodness forbid that we ran out of funding someday, that would still add value, because we would have learned along the way which pieces match which other pieces. But of course, we are hoping to be here for many years to come. So any funders in the audience, of course, we are a nonprofit, we do accept donations. But we're pretty confident, because AI, it doesn't keep growing in cost to keep growing in capabilities. We're pretty confident we are going to be here for the long term. And so we hope that this system just makes it easier and easier for existing emissions inventory experts to get better at their job and move faster, not to replace anyone.
Thank you, Gavin. Just I'll give 30 seconds to Lisa and Arturo if they want to come in, because we do need to move on from the Q&A. Lisa, do you have any comments? How does this impact you internally?
Yeah, I think similar to what Jerry and Gavin have said, it's definitely not going to be replacing the work that we're doing. I think there are intricacies that, especially within the Western Cape context, that the STARS project and the satellite information cannot capture, but it's definitely an additional resource, and it can be used for specific purposes as well as to feed into that the bigger program and filling in the gaps. So yeah, we're just excited to keep this conversation going and keep engaging and seeing where we can take this. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Arturo, any final comments from you?
Sí, justo un poco lo que reitero con lo que dice Gavin. Evidentemente, pues obviamente es otra forma de cómo obtener información que nos sirve para comparar, y creo que eso es algo interesante porque justo mientras más información podamos comparar esta información con otros datos, también nos puede dar una reducción de la incertidumbre o tener una mayor certeza sobre cuáles han sido las fugas o cuáles han sido, digamos, las limitantes en levantar algún dato. Evidentemente, por ejemplo, el caso del ganado que comentaba yo, nosotros tampoco vamos detrás de cada una de las vacas. Sería un poco imposible para el equipo de trabajo ir y levantar cada uno de este ganado, ¿no? Entonces, evidentemente sabemos que hay datos que están detrás y que otros tipos y otras metodologías nos han ayudado o nos ayudan a poder, digamos, comparar y ver un poco beneficios o perjuicios de cada uno de ellos. Evidentemente, y en el caso de Jalisco, el haber involucrado al área de geomática, que entiende sobre mapas, que entiende sobre satélites, que entiende sobre dónde están esta información quizá disponible de forma gratuita, ¿no? O dónde podemos obtener con mejor precio o con mejor calidad cierto tipo de fotografías, también fue un plus para el caso de Jalisco, que pudimos, digamos, hacer ese equipo de trabajo y poder, digamos, visualizar estas áreas de oportunidad con personas que además tienen estos conocimientos.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Arturo. Thank you, everyone, for answering these questions. The team is still going in the Q&A and answering some other questions that have been sent, so keep an eye on those. And before I hand in to our last speaker, which will have a few minutes, thank you, everyone, for sticking with us for so long. I just wanted to quickly announce that we've got a microsite, a new interactive page with some insights on the project states coming live. So I'm going to put that in the chat, and you are very welcome to go and explore that at your own time. And now we've got with us for some closing words, Casey Cronin, Director of Global Intelligence at ClimateWorks Foundation. To share some perspective from a funder that made this project a reality for this pilot year.
Great, thank you. Though I hate to cut off the Q&A, it was actually great to hear the real examples and see so much energy around this. I think just quick intro, ClimateWorks is a global platform for philanthropy, really focusing on how to innovate and accelerate climate solutions. So this project fit very neatly in with that, with our mission. Particularly, I think in 2021, it was clear with the innovative work coming from the Climate Trace team that the satellite imaging and its ability to help estimate cheap greenhouse gas emissions was a really new development. We were already working with the climate group on other projects and really understanding how states and regions, how vital they are as actors and implementers to climate policy. So I think our hope with this project and this first pilot phase was to provide a proof of concept, how that quick and easy access to more recent historical greenhouse gas emissions data could enable evidence-based decision-making, how more regular updates, more recent updates annually, or even honestly, possibly more often than that, could provide a much more efficient process to collecting and processing the data, and then really to how this could be rolled up to enable a better understanding of the global picture of greenhouse gas emissions. So honestly, it is more than exciting to see how this is all coming together, how much of this is coming to fruition with real examples from these first 6 pilot states. I think the future potential for more targeted and effective climate action across states and regions is immense. It's urgently needed, and we're really excited to see this project move forward in year 2 and 3 with more states and regions. We're happy to speak with other funders and partners about our experience and really seeing this scale up here in year 2 and year 3. I think it's vitally important and something for all of us to prioritize. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Casey. As Casey and Debbie mentioned, we are hoping to be able to continue this project, bring more states on board. So we do encourage you to get in touch with us if you've got any questions, if you want any more information, if you want to look for opportunities to be a part of this or collaborate or get access to some of this data. So yeah, please do get in touch. Thank you so much to all of our speakers, to all of the audience that joined us today. It has been an absolute pleasure. We have tried to answer to all of the questions in the Q&A, but if there's other important ones that have not been answered, we will try to follow up. This session has been recorded, and we will share the recording and the presentation slides with everyone who has attended and registered. So thank you once again, and I hope you will have a wonderful day or evening wherever you are in the world. Thank you.